Hey there, Pleasure Seeker. Welcome back to Pleasure Central Radio. I have a great episode for you today. Can't wait for you to hear it. And if you've been wondering where Pleasure Central Radio has been for the last 2 weeks, I have been revamping our website. It is not quite done. I thought it would be done by this morning, but I messed up on something. So, it's coming soon, and I have a great episode for you today. This is me and a friend of mine, Tom, talking about a show that I have really become entranced with this year, especially because it's such a good example of adulting in the real world. And it's also a little bit of a fantasy land for where at least me and my country have been for the last year. There's a lot of ease in play and simplicity, and it feels a lot more like the old world in a very pleasant way. So if you're curious about the show, check out this episode. It's only about 30 minutes long, and it might make you really curious about the whole season of Ted Lasso. I highly recommend watching this with family if you're home with family over the next month or so and you want to check it out. It is a fantastic show, and I think it'd have some great things for any family to talk about together. I want to dedicate this episode to Sam, who I think of as my own personal Ted Lasso. Someone with the guts to lead, the willingness to be wrong sometimes, and who knows how important accountability is.
Hey, you. Thanks for tuning in. Just a quick heads up, this episode is rated PG-13, so expect to hear some mild language or adult concepts. Welcome to Pleasure Central Radio, the place to rethink the assumptions we don't even realize we are making that keep us from getting what we truly want out of work, life, and love. Here is your sneak peek into an authentic, pleasure-focused conversation.
Well, hello there, Tom.
Hi, Rebecca.
Welcome to Pleasure Central Radio.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I am really excited to have you here for a couple of reasons, but the first reason is you introduced me to a TV show a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, you and your wife, and it has fast turned into both my favorite TV show and my most recommended TV show in the last month. I think I have probably told 20 different people that they need to go and watch this show.
That's a nice, pleasurable feeling to have brought something into someone's life that they call their favorite TV show. It's not often you get to do that, right?
That's true. And it's possible that I'm a little overzealous with using the term favorite for things that can't be the top number one. However, it is my favorite show right now. That I can be accurate and honest about.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's some very good reasons it's my favorite right now. I don't want this to sound like a push on the show for the entire thing. There's nobody who's paying us to say this, but I think that there are amazing stories worth watching, especially stories that help us see a new way of interacting with the world. That's exactly the kind of TV time I want to be putting into my life.
We should probably say what network this is on, right?
Oh yeah, we should. You wanna?
It's AppleTV, which has a lot of really good shows. And, it kind of came out of nowhere that all this really high quality TV on Apple TV, which has been around for a while, but now they're really spending the big bucks to make things great. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I am being paid to say this, by the way. Just put that out there.
Are you really?
Oh yeah. No. No, I'm not. I introduced this to you a while back after Leslie had heard great things about it. That's my wife. And we watched it, and it was, I don't know that every show hooks you on the first episode, but I think I got hooked on the first episode because it was just so genuine feeling and fresh. And it didn't have, which, I love deep plot buildups and complicated characters, but you could tell what was going to be enjoyable to the show right away. And that was kind of fun.
Yeah. That was
and you should talk about what you found out about the origin of this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, because we had been talking about the name of the show, I mean, the name is just Ted Lasso. It's a person's name. It's not a common name. Why would it stick out anywhere? Why would anybody watch it? And
I decided to do a little bit of research, and I found out that Ted Lasso was a character in a TV commercial that was created a couple of years ago. I don't know exactly when, but it was like an NBC Sports Center TV commercial or a Super Bowl commercial or something. But the character of Ted Lasso in this commercial was a very positive, almost stupidly positive American coach. And they were showing some cultural differences, and it was made for a really good commercial. But the character was so well liked that they brought him back for another commercial a couple of years later. And then they ended up creating a whole TV show out of this. And the main character was still played by Jason Sudeikis.
But that's a pretty cool origin story, and every superhero needs an origin story, so that's nice.
Do you put Ted Lasso into the superhero category?
I don't know. He's kind of like Batman, because Batman doesn't have superpowers, but he's still a superhero, right? Ted Lasso doesn't have any superpowers, but he's able to affect great change in the people around him. So, I don't know. Maybe.
There's a great book by Jim Collins. It's a business book, I think a business leadership book. It's called Good to Great. But in that book, he and his data analysis team had gone through and found many, many companies that went from being good to being great in a short period of time, and they analyzed what was similar about them. One of the most compelling similarities between those companies was that they had a certain type of leader in charge when they went from good to great. And he described these types of leaders as level 5 leaders. And I feel like Ted Lasso is a great example of a level 5 leader.
Yeah. He definitely has a huge impact on a team that's struggling quite a bit, and won't say yet what that impact is, but it's meaningful.
I know what you're talking about when you're talking about the impact. And another thing that I love about this show is that it doesn't take the typical Hollywood route. If it's going to be a good movie, it's going to be a happy ending, then certain things have to happen, right? It kind of takes the formulaic story concept and throws it out the window and starts with something a little different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they use sadness and other negative feelings as a good story arc or story tool to have characters grow. Because I think a lot of the characters go through, some kind of challenge. And that doesn't necessarily have to end in, them doing something that they wanted. It could just be growing, personally or whatever.
Yeah. It's reminding me of something. I don't remember who this was. I think it was a Marine. He said, when most people do push-ups, they get tired. When I do push-ups, I get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like that's the attitude that Ted Lasso and the entire show has. Most of the characters have towards the challenges that are showing up for them. It's like, right. Yes, I know this is a difficult thing, but I'm going to get through this and I'm going to be amazing and this is going to be good. So it's worth it, instead of, oh my God, not another change in my life that I have to face.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So there are a number of fun characters. Why don't you pick one and I will go second and I'll pick one that you particularly liked. And we'll put a challenge level of you can't pick Ted, because we want to show that there's lots of other interesting characters in here.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to pick Keely, who is such a fun character. She starts out as one of the players' girlfriends, ends up as being one of the social media brand managers for the entire team. But she does it in this really sweet, feminine, connected way. So first of all, I appreciate that. I appreciate that she's modeling something that I've known to be true for a long time, in that the feminine path to success, and by feminine path to success, I don't mean only women can do this, but I mean the receptive path to success is to shine and receive and be a really fabulous receiver. And that's what she does. That's how she ends up where she is. So yeah. I really appreciated that.
When I watched that, I actually thought of you when I saw that character. She has some of your traits that I like. And
oh, really? Which ones?
Yeah. So she's honest even when it's difficult to be honest, in a positive way always though, you know? And she's also has no social taboos that she's worried about. She'll just say whatever it is, no matter how awkward, if it needs to be said.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. We do have that in common.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to pick, I would say, a mid-level character as far as screen time, Coach Nathan. That guy, not to give too many spoilers away, but at the beginning, he's presented as the character who's bullied a lot. And, I identify with that because I was bullied when I was little. And he's got such a kind heart, but also he's extremely intelligent. And as the show goes on, he does a number of things that no one else thought of that end up being very effective for the team. And yeah, he really makes me smile in both the way he presents himself and the ideas he had, which you don't really expect coming from someone who on the first episode is shown as like the janitor type role.
Yeah. Yeah. And even more than that, like he expects that nobody ever is going to learn his name.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the first things Ted does is he insists, no, what's your name? And he's like, oh, nobody cares. And he's like, no. We want to know your name. We're not leaving until you tell us what your name is. And just that piece of humanity in that I don't care what level you're playing on the team, you're still on the team, you still matter, is a really beautiful beginning to the show. It sets the tone really nicely for everything else.
Yeah, I was really touched by the way that Ted interacted with him because it was very kind and also effective in some parts where, he did some unorthodox things. I won't say what yet, and they ended up, helping him in the long run. Okay, now we should talk about Ted because he's the most important character, obviously.
Okay.
So why don't you start?
All right, let's see. About Ted. What do I like about Ted? I think the honesty that he has is incredible. And it's not just that he's honest with other people, he's also honest with himself, which you see at a few key points in the show. There's some incredibly strong emotion that happens and how he deals with it and the way he's able to integrate that emotion and let it be something that fuels him and causes him to connect and be inward when he needs to.
So I think what strikes me the most about this show, and it's mostly because of Ted, is that I have not typically been interested in watching sports. I like to play them, but I don't particularly like to watch them. I don't particularly like to watch, sports related shows like, Friday Night Lights or whatever popular sports related shows, because for some reason I've never really got much enjoyment out of watching sports. However, here it is, a sports show, and I absolutely loved it. And I think that's because he made the sports aspect of it not be the main thing. It's obviously important, but it's not really what this show is about. The soccer itself is more like a tool to advance the show's agenda.
And for Ted Lasso, the soccer itself is more like a tool to help him connect with and lead these men in order to be able to be the best that they can be. And there are jokes throughout the show about how little soccer he knows.
Yeah.
And how he comes from an American football background. And so pretty much everything he knows is not applicable to this. And even though he does learn some soccer over the course of the show, he makes it so clear so many times that it's about supporting the players, not about winning.
Right. And his courage to jump into something that he only knows the adjacent general management of teams, but not the actual core to what he's going to coach. That would be extremely scary for someone to do that. But he's struggling at home, which they show early in the show, and he uses that struggle as a way to push himself to take a big chance, basically, right? To go to England without his family, teach a sport he doesn't even know. And he brings with him a guy named, I think, Coach Beard. Is that right? Yeah. And that character, I don't know that I fully figured it out. He's like the quiet but really smart type, I guess. And I'm not really sure what his motivations and thoughts were, but but he was a funny addition for sure.
Yeah, I feel like around a lot of very extroverted leader types, there's often that one that kind of keeps them on the level and makes sure all the details are being taken care of. And in this show, there's one point where they've gone through this very moving ceremony and they're about to burn a bunch of things in a can. And just as they strike the match, Coach Beard is like, maybe we should do this outside.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So just a little safety guardrail for Ted Lasso's enthusiasm and eagerness.
Yeah, I think it's true that when you're extremely passionate and you're moving quickly and you're, making a bunch of changes, that is a great time to have a grounded person with you to make sure that, let's say 90% of your ideas are good, but 10% are bad. If you can avoid the consequences of those bad things by not doing them because someone else can ground you, that's a pretty valuable role when you're someone who's running forward quickly to do what you think needs to be done.
Yeah, like carbon monoxide poisoning for the dozen people on your team before a big game.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big consequence.
Yeah. I also really liked Roy Kent. He is the team's captain, and he's gruff. He's older than the rest of the people, so he gets a lot of crap for that. He's not the best player, but he's probably the wisest player. And he's also the one that has the most respect and authority amongst the other players, because especially at the beginning, Ted Lasso does not have much respect or authority with the players, right? And so he's a fun character, and he's clearly strong on the outside, but on the inside, he is not strong. And he needs one of your favorite characters, Keeley, to try to evolve his inner self to be what his outer self projects. Does that sound right to you?
Oh, yeah. I really like that description of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fabulous character.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's one of the characters that you get to see grow and change the most between him and the other star.
And Rebecca.
Oh, yeah, and Rebecca. Oh, Rebecca. We
forgot to mention there's a Rebecca in this show who's not like you, so just we don't have that correlation.
She's not like me, except in that we're both badasses.
That's true. She is a powerful woman.
She is a powerful woman.
Yes. Yeah. Why don't you talk about her?
Okay. This one in particular really spoke to me because there was so much about what she was going through that I've resonated with. She had some big transitions, some big life transitions, and the fact that she's going through all of these transitions with an incredible amount of poise is something that I admire and respect a lot. And I feel like it's one of those kinds of characters that I look at and I say, okay, when I need to be able to walk like a badass on the red carpet, this is who I'm going to have in my head.
Yeah. So the thing that makes her the least similar to you is she is extremely closed off, right? And she's, you might say cold, although I think that's just an effect of the situation she's been put in. A lot of negative stuff has happened for her life, right? But she's successful and she's the owner of the team. I guess we didn't say what her role was. She's the team owner. And she, if you want to kind of use Eastern philosophy, she's kind of the yang to the yin of Ted Lasso, right? He's happiness, positivity, caring, kindness. And at least at the beginning, she's closed off. She's angry. She's manipulating, right? She's manipulating people. So they're somewhat opposites, but they become really good friends. And I think that's a pretty interesting, his pull on her moves her much closer to center over time.
Yeah, it does feel like they have a really beneficial interaction with each other. Like she's able to help him in some times and places when he really needs something, and he's able to help her when she feels most alone.
Yeah.
And that's really beautiful.
There's also, for me, I think this comes up in a lot of places, real life or movies or whatever, where there's two characters and you just think to yourself, if they were both working on the same page from the beginning, amazing things would have happened, right? Because they complement each other well if they're not working against each other. And that, I think that's the case for this, because you see things that happen that are like, oh, why did that have to happen? And I think the outcome would have been really different had they been working together from the beginning, but that would not have been as interesting. So
yeah, that's true. Another thing that I really appreciate is the locker room talk and the interaction between the men in the show. So, like, there's a couple of times where Coach Beard and Ted Lasso are sitting down and they do something that women watching will be like, oh my God, that is so weird. But men will be like, oh yeah, that's how we connect and talk to each other when things are serious. Like, they just tap their pints of beer on the bench between them, and then they cheers, and then they drink. And it's such a subtle, simple gesture.
I don't remember that, but yeah, makes sense. And they also have a lot of that stereotypical British rowdiness. Is that the right word to use? They're very rowdy, right? Which is kind of how sports fans, I think, in England are portrayed.
I'm also thinking that, speaking of the locker room stuff, there's one point where the entire team is really, really sad. And Ted Lasso walks in, and he has the most brilliant way of addressing it. And it's basically like, hey, look, I know you're sad, but there's something worse than being sad. It's being sad and alone. And you are not alone. Nobody in here is alone. Such a good way of addressing it and showing that feelings are okay, having your feelings are okay, having feelings around other people is actually a good thing. And I think he did such a great job of modeling what it can be like to be a man and to still own your masculinity without having to be toxic about the way emotions show up or are expressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like I don't want to speak for everybody, but I never had a figure like that in my life. I think I developed my EQ, emotional quotient, from seeing or feeling pain for a lot of my life and understanding how that pain affects people and trying to be more aware of that in my actions towards other people. But I never had someone else model that for me. And I'm assuming that's pretty common for guys, at least, Generation X and below.
Yeah, I think you're right. From the men that I've talked to, very few of them had a strong, solid example of that.
I think you mentioned that the role model for masculinity was one of the things that most touched you in this show. And I don't know that I can think of a show. I know there's probably some out there, but that have modeled this as well as this one does. Do you have any other shows you can think of that did a pretty good job for reference?
Honestly, I don't think I can. Probably the closest is some of the Star Trek. Not all of them. Many of the Star Trek have a lot of misogyny built in, but
Riker, what?
yeah. Some of them are pretty good. I especially liked Chakotay in Voyager. I feel like he's a pretty good example of healthy masculinity.
Yeah.
But I just had to search my brain there to try and find, are there any other ones? The other ones that I'm thinking of, I also saw this year. Legends of Tomorrow. There's a couple of characters in like season 4 and season 5. They've been there throughout the whole show, but they've grown to the point in season 4 and season 5 where they're able to show this really beautiful connection with each other and like apologize for things as they happen instead of waiting 10 or 15 years and having things fester.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite lovely. All right, so there you go. I got 3 examples.
Very good. I don't have any.
I'll keep my eye out for more. I think the truly beautiful thing about this show is that most of the characters are very self-aware and have a high level of self-acceptance, and they're actually honest enough with themselves to be watching their own patterns and making shifts and adulting. And I think that's such an unusual thing, especially to this level. Like, this is pretty high level. There are some major relationship transitions that happen in the show. And a lot of those major relationship transitions would, in our normal society or in normal Hollywood way, would be really painful. And they do such a nice job of taking the pain and transforming it into fuel for growth, which is cool.
Yeah, I think Keely is kind of the center of a lot of that. She is pivotal in Rebecca's transformation. She's pivotal in Roy's transformation. She's at least relevant in Jamie Tart. We didn't mention him, but he's the star player. She's involved in his transformation. There's probably at least someone else I'm not thinking of. She's kind of like, I mean, her and Ted together are the most influential characters, I think, in that show.
That's a good point. Yeah. Now
because she's so self-aware, right? Like you were just talking about. She really knows who she is and helps people also figure out who they are.
Now I'm liking more and more that you say I'm most like her.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
She's also pretty. Like
she is pretty. Thank you, Tom.
I think she's feistier than you. That would be the main difference.
Yes. I'm internally feisty and she's outwardly feisty.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got definite attitude. So I've been saying a lot recently that there's a difference between a bite of pleasure, a nibble of pleasure, and a pleasure-filled life. And I think this is a very good example of the difference between a nibble of pleasure and a pleasure-filled life, because to me, a pleasure-filled life has to come from living the things that matter the most to you, living your values, living with the people that matter the most to you, putting your priorities in whatever order matters the most to you, right? So being conscious and intentional about those kinds of things creates over time a more and more pleasure-filled life. And at least that's been my experience. So getting to see these characters that have created around themselves the lives and the experiences that you can tell they've wanted to have for a while. They're all very happy with what they achieve. They do make jokes many times about the fact that they get played to pay a game. So come on, how bad can it be?
One neat thing about the show is I feel like I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know how it was going to end up. It didn't end up the way I thought it was going to end up. And I think that is a big win for a TV show. When they put you somewhere at the end that you didn't expect, and you felt like they got there without cheating, if you will, cheating the audience. Like it's the natural progression, and then you're surprised. And I think that's a great experience for a show to have.
Yeah, it was the next thing that felt true. That was the ending.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite beautiful.
Yeah, and perfectly set up for season 2, I mean, so let's hope for that. I haven't really, heard much about this show other than the direct communication that I've given people on it. So I don't know if it's popular or not, but I hope so.
I hope it gets more popular after this goes live.
Yeah, well, I'm sure a few people will definitely check it out.
And I hope it does, because when we can see other people interacting with the world like this, it can change our own perspective on what responsibility we have, on what we can actually change and shift, and on how important it is to make even just a small little difference in someone else's life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and taking chances is okay and can pay off. Obviously, the right chances, not just any chance, not going to Vegas, but taking healthy chances, I guess. Which is how this whole show basically starts, right?
Yeah.
He takes a big chance.
Yep.
something that he feels in his gut is the right thing for him to do. Kind of that pleasure focus, right? Following what he feels inside is the right thing to do.
I'm all for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me on here. This was fun.
It was such a pleasure, Tom. Thank you for being here.
Hey, Pleasure Seeker. Well, that's it for today's conversation. Here at Pleasure Central Radio, we love using conscious communication, science geekery, and copious amounts of true pleasure to improve our partnerships, our money, and our love lives. And we hope you do too. If you loved what you heard here, we'd love a review. You can listen to other episodes of the podcast and read thought-provoking essays or poems written by me, Radiant Rebecca, by checking out the blog on pleasurecentralpodcast.com. Sign up to hear about new episodes immediately at pleasurecentralpodcast.com. Your thought to ponder today is...
There's one point where the entire team is really, really sad. And Ted Lasso walks in and he has the most brilliant way of addressing it. And it's basically like, hey, look, I know you're sad, but there's something worse than being sad. It's being sad and alone. And you are not alone. Nobody in here is alone.